You are listening to the Wealth Formula Podcast with Buck Joffrey. Get ready to change your life.
Welcome, everybody. This is Buck Joffrey with the Wealth Formula Podcast. And today I want to remind you that there is an entire website called wealthformula.com, jam-packed full of additional information and resources, which you really should check out. Amongst them are my book, 7 Secrets of Eternal Wealth, which you can download as an electronic version. It is sort of my Wealth 1.0 book for beginners and gives you a nice foundation of real asset investing. There's also other things you can sign up for on wealthformula.com, including the Accredited Investor Group, otherwise known as Investor Club, which there's lots going on in that area right now. If you're an accredited investor, if you'd like to put some lazy money to work and you want to be part of Deal Flow, join our group. This is a group of accredited investors. You sign up, you will get a survey. Basically, at that point, you have a conversation with me, and then we can potentially start talking about some of the opportunities that we do within Investor Group. Again, to be accredited is not something that you have to apply for per se. An accredited investor is something that you are or you are not, sort of like being pregnant or not being pregnant. An accredited investor is simply somebody who makes $200,000 per year, $300,000 per year if filing jointly and has a net worth of a minimum of $1 million outside of their personal residence. So if you're in California or New York and you just got lucky, that does not count. Anyway, check it out. It is a very active group of individuals. Go to wealthformula.com and sign up for Investor Club. Finally, even if you aren't an accredited investor, but you just can't get enough of Wealth Formula Podcast, listen, I understand. You should join our personal group, Wealth Formula Network. And Wealth Formula Network is started off by a course which gives us a basic foundation which everybody should have. That course is called Your Roadmap to Real Wealth. And after that, you have an entire community that you become part of, including a Facebook page. We have a portal with additional information, and probably the most popular aspect, the bi-weekly Zoom video calls that we have. They're mastermind calls, which people tend to really enjoy. If you cannot find people to talk about this stuff who really get into it, you need to find a little community outside of your neighbors who only want to talk about football and grass and things like that. Check it out. WealthFormulaRoadmap.com. We'd love to have you. As far as this week's show, let me start by saying that last week I got a few emails that were wondering what the heck I was doing sending out these quote-unquote scammy emails from my friend Tika Tawari about investing in pot, in cannabis, marijuana, whatever you want to call it. And looking back at those emails, I totally get it. For one thing, I didn't really, I didn't really put an introduction and say what I was doing. I was just basically, putting in Tika's emails in there. And if you read those, they might actually sound a little bit like snake oil advertisements, right? Because, well, they're sales letters. That's why. But as you know, I pride myself on not being a platform for internet marketers or for people raising capital that have no clue what they're doing. I will say that in my early podcasting days, I was certainly less careful about who I interviewed. I was more interested back then in sort of this idea of exposure to broader alternative investment opportunities without necessarily advocating for anything. So say somebody was doing some agricultural product in the Caribbean somewhere. I didn't really look into it. I just thought it was interesting that they were doing it and wanted to learn more about what something like that looked like. It didn't mean necessarily that I was advocating for or that I was an investor in it myself. In fact, some of them I would never invest in at all. As a podcaster, I thought I was pretty much just providing education and that people would surmise that this was education and not jump to the conclusion that I was supporting a particular investment. See, the problem is that once you get behind the mic, whether you like it or not, you end up being a bit of an influencer. And so I ran into this problem where people thought just because I was interviewing people, I was supporting them. So you have to be careful when you get in a position of any kind of influence that you are very careful about who you expose your audience to. And anyway, I've learned that since then. And you see, that's important because there is a lot of noise out there, and most of it is worthless. Most of the stuff you're seeing advertisements or are nothing more than marketing, and they are not very useful, and they're likely to lose you money. The challenge is to figure out who to take seriously and who not to take seriously. I will say that in my own experience, you actually cannot draw a direct correlation between marketing efforts and value. Okay, and that's really important. In other words, there are, in fact, individuals who market very heavily and who are actually still worth listening to. Let me give you an example. Robert Kiyosaki. Robert Kiyosaki is a master marketer. He is so good at marketing that you often don't even know that you are on the receiving end of it when you are. Now, I recognize that about Robert. I also recognize that Robert's books and philosophy have fundamentally changed my life and the lives of hundreds of thousands of other people. So, guess what? There is a tremendous amount of value in what he does, even though he's a marketing machine. Now, another area where you kind of see that is in the area of newsletters. Okay, newsletters are particularly difficult to assess because, what is the business model of a newsletter in the first place? Well, they aren't partnering with you on an investment, et cetera. What they're doing is they're selling newsletters. So if you want to have a successful newsletter, you have to have people who actually buy it. If you can't sell those newsletters, you're not going to make any money. If you're not going to make any money, anybody worth listening to is not going to write them. Make sense? So how do you get people to buy them? Well, you have to advertise. And when you advertise, sometimes you sound a little bit cheesy. That's just the nature of advertisements. It's the way you sell things. Now, does that mean that a newsletter, therefore, is not valuable because it has, sort of a advertising, marketing flavor to it? In my opinion, the answer is no. In fact, if you look at it, there are really some really smart people writing newsletters with tremendous value who are marketing like crazy. I mean, like these examples. I mean, I follow Marin Katusa in the junior mining sector. Also, Doug Casey is another one. These are a couple of examples of really smart people writing interesting information. Whether or not you're going to take it, that's another question. But they're really smart, thoughtful newsletters that are marketed very heavily. One of my favorite newsletters is actually Palm Beach Confidential, written by Tika Tiwari. Ironically, I met Tika at one of Marin Katusa and Doug Casey's events. He was one of their guests there. Now, Palm Beach Confidential is a cryptocurrency-focused newsletter. And I have been a subscriber to it for a couple of years now. And in fact, I subscribed to it after meeting Tika at one of these events and realizing, man, this guy is really smart. He's not, I saw some of the advertisements for Palm Beach Confidential, and frankly, I just thought it was kind of cheesy. I didn't think it was real. It seemed really scammy. But then I met this guy, and he's really thoughtful and smart, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to give this thing a try. So over that time, though, the last couple of years of being a subscriber and getting to know his work, not only him personally, I've really come to appreciate how much time and thought and, the approach that Tika puts into his work and, all of the methodology that goes into that research. It's a lot of hard work, and I appreciate it. And these are speculative investments that he's focusing on. And I certainly don't agree with everything he says or recommends, even in Palm Beach Confidential. But he works his tail off and is one of the primary sources for cryptocurrency news and information that I use. As you know, I have my own podcast, Consensus Network, which, well, I don't do as much on right now. But I will say that Tika is one of the places where I get information. There's other sources as well. But his picks have done extremely well. Now, understand that this has been an area where, there's been crypto winter, so nobody's done great. But I think the things that he's done in particular have had a lot of thought behind them. I think a lot of them are going to do it really, really well. Anyway, that's why you've been getting emails from me regarding Tika's tika venture, and that I basically, cut and pasted his invitations to his latest venture into the cannabis space. Tika works under the umbrella of a marketing machine called Palm Beach Research Group. And, this thing, like I said, is a marketing machine. And I don't really have an opinion on most of what they do because I'm only really concerned with the individuals that provide the underlying content of a given newsletter. So Tika is one of these guys that I like. So I wanted to definitely support him because I know he's been working hard to get into the cannabis space. And a lot of people in Wealth Formula Nation, including myself, have been trying to figure out how to get exposure to this cannabis world, investing while avoiding all of the shady characters that seem to go along with it. And that's a tough job, but that's the focus of Tika's latest venture. And if anyone can do it well, I think he can. So make sure to tune in here. In a minute, we'll be back after these messages with Tika Tiwari of Palm Beach Confidential, now talking about his newest foray into the cannabis world. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Today, my guest in Wealth Formula Podcast, he is well known to you. I'm sure his name is Tika Tiwari. Tika's got a pretty inspirational story. Growing up in foster care in the UK, then going to the U.S. at the age of 16 with $150 in his pocket, only to become an employee at Lehman Brothers at just the age of 18, when I was pretty much out there partying and doing nothing else. And only 2 years later became the youngest vice president in the history of Shearson Lehman. He went on to become a hedge fund manager and has had a tremendous amount of success on both Wall Street and off Wall Street. And most notably in recent years, and probably familiar to you, is his work in the cryptocurrency space with his well-known Palm Beach Confidential newsletter, to which I am a subscriber. Tika, welcome back to Wealth Formula Podcast.
Thanks, Buck. It's wonderful to be here.
So, Tika, you've been on the show before a couple times talking about cryptocurrency. And one of the things I like about you and your approach is how much research you do and everything. And despite being in such highly volatile arenas like crypto, you're really cautious. You've been, very open about, being maybe not being as cautious early in your career. Obviously, you're, 20 years old, specifically around the Asia crisis, late 90s. Can you talk a little bit about that experience and how it framed the way you invest in your philosophy sort of over the next 20 years?
Sure. So I was about 27, 28 in the late 90s when the Asian crisis was happening. And at that point, I had been working on Wall Street for about 10 years, and I had never been wrong. So every investment that I believed in, I went all in on and used maximum leverage. And this had worked for 10 years, and I had made a lot of money. I was very wealthy at a very young age. And I was operating under the belief that this Asian crisis was going to get worse and that the whole market would collapse. And so I went net short, meaning I sold stocks short, and I bought put options. I went into the futures market, and I was right. The stock market fell apart and it started to collapse. But then the Federal Reserve came out and, in a bid to save the banks, cut interest rates. And then the whole market started to rally. And instead of cashing in my chips, I had this kind of ego moment where I'm right, the market's wrong, and I started shorting more and more and more and more. And long story short, I think we all know how this ends. In a 3-week period of time, I was essentially bankrupt and actually had to file for bankruptcy about a year and change after that. It was a devastating loss after a 10-year run that almost, wiped me out. And it took me 2 years just to mentally get back to where I was before and to have the mental strength to look at the mistakes I made. And ultimately what it came down to was, I'm very good at finding new trends. I'm very good at reading the tea leaves, but I had no risk management in place. And so what I realized I needed to do was I needed a way to manage my risk, whether through position sizing, whether through stop losses. I couldn't go all in and bet it all on black again, right? And so this is what completely transformed the way that I manage my money, and the techniques and the lessons that I teach to my hundreds of thousands of subscribers across my different newsletters.
Yeah, and one of the reasons I bring that up is because I like the way you're so transparent about it. I've said before many times that I think that one of the things that when you have somebody you're listening to, and for potentially for guidance in investing, it's nice to have people with a little bit of scar tissue, because if the only thing that you've ever seen is blue skies, you don't know what's going to happen. You're not looking for the storm to hit, and that's kind of the approach I think you've taken. And talk a little bit about that specifically when it comes to small proportion, small size allocations, things that you do, basic sort of fundamentals.
So a lot of what I'm really famous for is this type of investing called asymmetric risk investing. And so asymmetric risk investing is where you can take what's essentially a trivial amount of money, $200, $400. I'm talking, this is all relative, right? If you live in Bangladesh, $200 isn't a trivial amount of money. But for the average American, $200 to $400 is a relatively small amount of money. And then you allocate this into a basket of ideas that have the ability to go up 10x, 100x, in some cases more than 1,000x. And so when the whole crypto boom started, I said, look, this is an incredibly volatile market. You can't put money in that you're going to miss. You have to take small, even-sized positions across a broad portfolio of ideas, because some of these are going to go to zero. Right? There's no question some will go to zero. But if you take a small amount of money, 5 to 10% of your liquid net worth, you can grow it dramatically. And, since doing that and sticking to that, I've received countless emails from people saying how they've become millionaires, or they've transformed their retirement. They took $12,000 and turned it into 1.2 million, or they took $10,000 and turned it into $300,000. I mean, they're moving the needle on their life, their financial life, without putting their current life at risk. And this, to me, is the crux of what I do. If you're not yet wealthy, there are investments that can get you wealthy without you putting your current net worth at risk.
A lot of that is with, at least with crypto, and presumably with other things that you're doing, are dealing with small cap stocks, small cap, cryptos. Is that fair?
Yes, although there is a new way that I have discovered it's actually one of my favorite ways to make money, where you can take a small amount of money and multiply it dramatically. Until recently, I hate to say this, but you had to really be already very wealthy to participate in this market. But some rules have recently changed that have opened that market up. And this is, and I'm going to be having an event talking specifically about this new form of investing.
Right. So let's get to kind of what, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on is that I have had a number of investors, I've had a number of listeners asked me the question about how to get exposure to marijuana. So when I first started hearing about the legalization of marijuana myself, my first thought was that it is essentially, listen, this is a big deal because it's the end of prohibition, and whoever invests in the Budweiser or Coors of the psychotropic part of this industry is going to make a lot of money. But there actually is another part of this market which I'm actually personally even more interested in, at least for the short term, and it has no mood changing effects at all. Can you talk about the different elements of cannabis investing?
Yes. So the biggest mistake I see investors making right now is focusing in on the psychoactive marijuana, right? The marijuana that gets you high, that has this cannabinoid called THC in. The thing is that's a tiny market relative to the legal markets. There are two forms of cannabis. There's illegal cannabis that is illegal at the federal level, that has THC. And then there's something called legal cannabis, which is called hemp, that has CBD. So CBD is a derivative of the hemp plant. It's a cannabinoid. There are more than 100 cannabinoids in marijuana. But CBD is legal. And the CBD market is expected to impact $2.6 trillion worth of other markets. And that's according to Merrill Lynch. So let's put that in perspective with the psychoactive market, right? So the psychoactive recreational market globally is $166 billion, which is a big market, but it's tiny in comparison to CBD. So CBD is been linked with, and it doesn't get you high at all. It has no psychoactive components. So CBD has been linked to anti-inflammation, helping people sleep, pain relief, arthritis relief. Vets have been using them to treat PTSD. The science is still very new around CBD, but the groundswell of support for CBD is massive. And you've got enormous corporations lining up to put CBD in their products. So I'm talking about multi-billion-dollar companies, Constellation Brands, Altria, Target, Walmart, CVS are all going to be carrying CBD products. So the CBD trend is much, much bigger than the recreational trend. And there's going to be much more money to be made on the CBD side than there will be on the recreational side.
So how did you get interested in this stuff in the first place? Because it seems like, crypto to cannabis, what got you really excited about this and was sort of the aha moment?
Well, I was always very negative on cannabis. I grew up under this belief that cannabis was the devil's lettuce, and it was, right, if you smoked cannabis, there was something wrong with you, and you were a slacker and a loser, and you were never going to have a successful life. So this was, everybody from our generation was pretty much raised with that idea. And then, so in December of last year, I saw the Farm Bill get passed, which legalized hemp and legalized CBD. And I said, okay, that's really interesting. And then I saw Constellation Brands, with the huge beverage maker. Right. So they own that Mexican beer. Begins with C? Corona.
Corona. Okay.
Yeah, they own Corona. They own a ton of different beers, and so they put up $4 billion. They invested $4 billion in a CBD/marijuana company, and then Altria, the maker of Philip Morris, the maker of Marlboro cigarettes, they ponied up $1.8 billion. And then Novartis, which is a $185 billion drug company, yep, they got involved in the space. And so when I saw major A-list blue chip companies getting involved in CBD, I said, okay, this is real, and I need to do a deep dive into it. And I did. I went everywhere from the fields of Columbia to the labs in Toronto, in Western Toronto, to the CBD fields in Canada, to the dispensaries, to the cultivation rooms. I did a deep dive. And what I discovered was really incredible. It completely changed my mind about the efficacy of these products, how they're changing people's lives on the medical front, and how even the combination of CBD and THC in very low dosages is absolutely transforming people, getting them off opioids. It really is remarkable stuff, Bob.
Yeah. I mean, let's focus a little bit on the legalization aspect. So I'm not, like you, maybe the way you grew up, I'm not a big fan of the pot culture, right? It kind of irritates me. I really don't like the smell of it. And frankly, I'm not excited to see smoking it legalized because it'll invade my personal space. But a lot of people feel, and a lot of people actually feel that way, I think, and I suspect that will potentially slow down the progress, at least of the THC part in the United States. But in reality, the CBD part is very different, and that was like really eye-opening for me. In fact, I will tell you that I have chronic back problems, and I kind of one day recently in the last month, decided that, you know what, I had pulled my back again, and ibuprofen wasn't doing anything, and I do not like to take things like Vicodin, et cetera, because I don't like the way they make me feel. So I went and actually got some CBD, and I will tell you, I mean, I'm not joking you, it was like 6 hours later, it was my pain was completely gone. And remember, I'm a physician here, okay?
Right.
But this really happened to me, and now I've had a couple of times where that happened again, and I took it, and like clockwork, I'm like, this is not. I mean, I wasn't going into it thinking it was going to work. I was going into it thinking it wasn't going to work, right? And
Yeah.
it worked. I don't know if you've had any sort of personal experiences like that as well, but that's really got me excited.
I have. It's why I started using it. I work out a lot, but over the years, I've developed chronic pain in my shoulder and in my wrists. And sometimes it's debilitating. And so I thought, okay, let me try this CBD stuff. And I did. And by the next morning, I could move like I was in my early 30s. It was wild, because it wasn't just the pain in my shoulder and wrist went away. The joint pain that you kind of forget about because you're just so used to living with it every day. Right. You don't really notice that it's there until it's gone. And all of a sudden I'm thinking, oh my God, it doesn't hurt to move my body. So yes, I'm a believer in the product.
Yeah, and so as a physician, again, I'm backing up, and when this happened, I started to read up a little bit on it. And as you know, there was a recent release of an FDA-approved drug for intractable epilepsy in children. So in that regard, to me, CBD and the effects that we're seeing, the effects that I think science is actually, showing now, even I think there was a 60 Minutes episode showing the benefits to, opioid addicts and that sort of thing. To me, CBD is not parallel to the end of prohibition as I was thinking about marijuana in general, but rather the discovery of something more like aspirin, where it is a drug that permeates our life and has, some very, very strong clinical beneficial uses that we're just not using. What do you think of that analysis, or what that sort of parallel?
Yeah, I would say that's accurate. I would take it a step further and say, unlike aspirin, which can have some pretty nasty side effects if you take too much of it, so far we haven't seen that in CBD. And also, unlike aspirin, CBD will show up in foods, beverages, creams. It's going to touch every aspect of our life within the next couple of years.
Yeah, I tend to agree with it. So you say that participating right now in the cannabis market is potentially bigger than cryptos. And that's saying a lot in my view, as I am a crypto guy. I am a blockchain
as am I. Yes.
Right, and I was going to say and you are too. So that is saying a lot. Explain what you mean by that.
I'm just looking at pure market size, right? So if you look at crypto, the market value of crypto is $250, $300 billion. Merrill Lynch says CBD will impact $2.6 trillion worth of goods, right? And it will happen faster than crypto. So as soon as we're actually waiting right now for the FDA to come out with guidelines on how CBD can be added into foods. But you look at the CEO of Mondelez, which owns all these different brands like Chips Ahoy and Cadbury's. The CEO is saying, we're just waiting. As soon as it's ready, you'll have CBD in Oreos, you'll have CBD in Chips Ahoy and Miller wafers. It's going to go in everything. Okay, so unlike crypto, which is going to take time to reach that level of market saturation, you're going to see, it'll feel like overnight. One day you'll walk into your store and there's no CBD products. The next day you walk in and there'll be 8,000 CBD products. It'll be everywhere, and it will permeate every aspect of American life.
Yeah. Interesting. So I've said it before, I love the space and I'd love to get some exposure. However, investing in private placements in this industry, I've found to be pretty challenging. Private placements are mostly where I invest, most of where my accredited investor group invests. The reality I found in this space is there's just so much darn shadiness that I can't I could never pull the trigger on anything in particular. So how do you get exposure to this kind of industry without the risk of getting totally burned?
So you have to do a tremendous amount of research. So we on our side have looked at more than 70 deals, private deals, as well as we've looked at every major public player in the space. And like crypto, many of them are either just bad ideas or outright fraudulent.
Right.
So, a quick litmus test for us is if we send you 20 questions and you never respond, you're automatically out, right?
Yeah.
So the work that we've been doing, once you pass that first test of answering our 20 questions, the next thing we do is see how you do in a live one-on-one. And 9 out of 10 won't even show up for the one-on-one, like something like this. And the rest that do, you'll ask them a difficult question and they either won't answer it, they'll evade, or they'll just punt, right? Mm-hmm. So again, I'm a big believer in this self-selection process of people weeding out. Just ask very direct questions and the wrong people won't be able to answer them. Mm-hmm. And then we have to fly. So once we get somebody to that point where we've done that, they've passed all this interviews and we've done the research, then we actually fly out and we say, okay, you say you own these assets. Do you own them? So we go look at the assets. Then we go look at who actually owns the assets. Does the company that they're saying own the assets actually own them? And then we sit down with the team for hours and hammer them with the most direct, embarrassing questions that most people are just too embarrassed to ask, right? Like, what's your biggest failure and what did you learn? Or I'll even say, I don't believe you. Why should I believe you? Just really obnoxious. Right. You want to be obnoxious because you want to see, okay, what's this guy made of, right? Can he handle a little bit of pressure or not? And if you're talking to a CEO like that and he just collapses or loses his temper, he's just not the right guy for you to invest with.
Yeah. And for people who are not into private placements, obviously there's the option of some small caps as well. You've got something coming up called, and I have to tell you, I've sent out some emails about this. The name I think is a little tricky. It's Pocket Change Millionaire Summit.
Yes.
Tell us about it.
So what this is where I'm going to reveal an approach that I've used to turn as little as $1,000 into $1.6 million. And it's not crypto. So I'm going to talk about that investment approach, that investment method. And I'm also going to talk obviously about CBD and the market and how we see that market emerging and where I am finding the best investment opportunities in CBD. Because like you, I'm an investor, and like you, I've dealt with the same frustration of the amount of fraud and bad ideas in this space. So this is why I flew down to Colombia to look at a deal. I had an armed escort with me. We were in bulletproof Toyota Land Cruisers. And, I went up into the mountains to view this 2,200 acre site, about 4,000 feet up. And they're ripping out all the pineapples and pine trees and they're planting CBD. So Colombia is going to become the lowest cost provider of CBD in the world. Their all-in cost is like 10 cents a gram, which is, incredibly cheap. Nobody can compete with that at this point. So the Colombian government is all in on CBD, and they're in the process of getting GMP certified to the EU so they can actually start selling directly into the EU. So I've been doing that. I've been meeting with a lot of the players in Canada, which is kind of where all the money is right now in this space, because it's legal at a national level and the banks can work with Canadian companies. I've interviewed some of the biggest CEOs in the space. And what I will say, and I'm kind of pull back the curtain here a little bit, CBD is just one cannabinoid. Right? There are 100 cannabinoids. And so what I've been doing, Buck, is focusing on, at least on the public company side, companies that are looking at exploiting different cannabinoids. See, the problem right now that needs to be solved is that you've got cannabinoids like THCV, which is an appetite suppressant. Well, THCV, that cannabinoid, is less than 1% of a typical plant. In order to isolate THCV, it's very expensive. You can't do it at scale, right? Let's say a pharma company wants to create a pill that is an appetite suppressant. There's no way for them to do it at scale right now. So one of the things I've been looking at are companies that are creating biosynthetic cannabinoids and that can create them at scale. Because once you can do that, they can then license them out, and now you're creating a multi-billion-dollar skinny pill, literally a skinny pill. You take the pill, I don't need to eat. I mean, yeah. I think we could all use that.
So what the summit is going to be is just sort of describing the process, maybe talking about some of the companies involved, and an introduction potentially to some of maybe a new newsletter you're doing. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
So I've been writing some emails out to people, and you can, if you've seen that, you see the link there, but you can also go to wealthformula.com and you'll see an icon there that says how to invest in cannabis. And if you click on that, you can register for this event that Tika is putting on. Tika, I wanted to, before we go, I know we've been talking about pot and cannabis here, but I have a lot of people who are Palm Beach Confidential subscribers, including myself. Something that happened recently in crypto, I just need to get your thoughts on before we go. Facebook has released a white paper regarding Libra, which is their cryptocurrency. They're calling it a cryptocurrency. Mm-hmm. I'm curious on your thoughts of the impact of Libra on the cryptocurrency market in general. Is it positive or is it negative?
Oh, I think it's wildly positive. But first, let's be clear. Libra is not a cryptocurrency. It's just a payment rail. It's an internal payment rail among a group of providers, right? It's very similar to PayPal, except they're using a tokenized form. It's not a true cryptocurrency. But the reason why I think it's very beneficial is that Facebook decided to latch on to that nomenclature, right? Of that narrative of crypto, which means they're going to have to educate their 2.6 billion users, or whatever the number is now, on what cryptocurrency is, how it works, how you use it, what a wallet is. And now this all of a sudden is going to open the doorway to people discovering real cryptocurrencies, like Bitcoin, like Ethereum, like Dash, and all these other coins that are out there. So to me, I see this as incredibly bullish for the overall market. And in fact, even as you've seen Libra get launched, Bitcoin has been going up. It's only going to bring more people into the ecosystem. And when you have one of the world's most valuable companies educating soccer moms and the average everyday person on crypto, it's very, very beneficial for the broad-based market.
I have to admit, I did something uncharacteristic, which was to buy Facebook stock today. And the reason I did that is because I do, like you, I think this is going to be a big deal. But I don't, and I do think it's sort of a gateway to Bitcoin and that sort of thing. But I think what you're going to see is I think people will start to see the limitations of a centralized cryptocurrency, and that is what's going to drive people to Bitcoin. For example, I think it'd be quite easy for a government to ban the use of Libra or Facebook, and we've seen China has already banned Facebook, right? And so to be able to want to use that mechanism, but use it in a way that is censorship free, it's not printable, it's not confiscatable, I think that's the value. But initially, I think it's going to be a really big deal for Facebook as a company. I mean, they're basically a central bank now.
Right. They've basically created their own central payment system. It's essentially an internal PayPal that they've created, which is very beneficial for them. They're going to make a lot of money from it. The profits will be tremendous, but it's not a cryptocurrency. It's a centralized payment system, just like any other centralized payment system that can be blocked, confiscated, and tracked.
Fascinating stuff, Tika. As always, it has been a pleasure talking to you again. I highly encourage people to check out the summit on this new cannabis newsletter that Tika will be doing. You can go to wealthformula.com, click on the How to Invest in Cannabis icon to sign up for that and check it out. Tika, thanks so much for being back on Wealth Formula Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Buck. It's wonderful to be here.
Be right back. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Hope you enjoyed that. Tika is always a very insightful guy to talk to, and I enjoy talking to him. He really has an incredible perspective, having been inside and outside of Wall Street for as long as he has. I should also point out that one of the things that I think is interesting about Tika is he doesn't really need to work anymore. He's made a lot of money, and he's a guy who just really genuinely loves the game. Right? And his game, as you mentioned, is investments with what we call asymmetric risk profile. That means you invest a small amount knowing that you could lose it all or potentially make 1,000% on your investment. So for people who can afford to lose a little bit of money, this is the kind of investing that may have a small part in your portfolio. And to me, for example, that's where cryptocurrency has been. Understand that 90% of my investable assets are going into real estate again this year. I mean, these acquisitions, by the way, if you're wondering what I'm investing, I'll be very clear on that. Primarily what I'm investing is real estate that is coming through Investor Club. So again, if you're an accredited investor and you're interested in what those kinds of opportunities look like, join Investor Club at wealthformula.com. However, if you have some money to play with, adding a small allocation for asymmetric risk investments can really add some potential juice to your portfolio. And guess what? It's actually really fun too. So maybe that risk you take is in the area of cannabis. I don't know. That's up to you. I don't know for sure that I will subscribe to Tika's newsletter myself. I have subscribed to his cryptocurrency newsletter and I really enjoy it. But one thing's for sure, I will definitely be checking out the presentation that he's going to be doing. And if you want to do the same, go ahead to wealthformula.com and click on the icon that says How to Invest in Cannabis, and you'll see, guess what, his sales page. But again, just watch it. Watch it and see what you think. That's all you can do. I know Tika. I like him. I think he's a smart guy and he has a lot of integrity. Anyway, that's it for me this week on Wealth Formula Podcast. This is Buck Joffrey signing off.
Thank you for listening to the Wealth Formula Podcast. Visit us on the web at wealthformula.com. The information contained in this podcast are opinions, not fact. As always, consult your own financial team before making any investment. See you next time.